Hello, this is Joshua from Frost Dragon Designs, and today I'd like to talk to you about my D20 hard enamel pin. This is the fifth pin in the D20 series that I've been working on recently. 3 of the first 4 are what I would call trash rolls pins, in that the animal and the D20 are surrounded by garbage. The ferret is an exception in that he's surrounded by treasure, because he's quite the accomplished thief. Now, this bee pin is surrounded by plants, but I'm still going to call it a trash rolls pin because for most Americans, if they're thinking about their lawns, this pin has clover and dandelion. These would be considered weeds for most American lawns, but I like them, and bees like them too. So let's get into the design. We've started off with the ferret pin, because that's the one that we had just done before we started working on this one, and we quickly removed the ferret himself, and we changed the color of the D20 to something that's more honey-like, because that was kind of my working title that I had for this as I was designing it was the Honey D20. I don't know why I thought that was funny, but I did. I'm starting real quick into it, just working on the dandelion leaves. From a lawn standpoint, I don't really like dandelions, but I think that's because people have told me my whole life, these are weeds, get rid of them. You don't want them in your lawn. But the more I learn about wildlife and, protecting bees and that sort of thing, the more I'm realizing that, if I can leave some of these out in my side yard, that's fine. Like, I don't have to have a pristine golf course as a lawn. And to my understanding, actually, dandelions are cultivated in some places. I've heard that you can produce wine out of them. I've never had it. Kind of interested. I think these are edible. I'm not advising you to eat them because I don't know 100%, but I'm pretty sure they're edible, especially if wines are being made out of them. But I think for most people, this should be a fairly recognizable plant. It's got the bright yellow flower and kind of jagged edges on the leaves. I did some research, and there are a couple different leaf patterns for dandelions, so I just went outside and grabbed a leaf off of a dandelion that was in my yard, and I thought that worked well for a reference. So that was pretty much how I decided which leaf pattern I was going to use. It was just whatever was out in my yard at the time. So you can see that I have decided that I'm going to have 2 flowers in this. And if you look at these, the way I have them right now, the one flower kind of leans away from the triangle, and we have the second flower closer into the triangle. This would be fine if I had an element that leaned away from the triangle in a similar fashion on the other side. I didn't want the flower to just be completely jutting out like that, though, because look how thin the stem is. I just started having concerns about it. So I started playing with it to figure out, how can I adjust these so that I don't have just that thin section supporting the flower head. It probably would have been fine. I think I've done things with thinner supports, but I just felt like there was a better solution. So what I've ended up doing is I ended up switching the flowers around a little bit and moving them so that they're supported by that big triangle in the background. And there's actually very little of them overhanging out into open space. That just made me feel more comfortable with this design, and because really I honestly was afraid that maybe during the polishing process of the pins that maybe some of those flower heads would get snapped off. The polishing wheels are basically, they're a high-speed spinning wheel that, is designed to remove the layers of the enamel and metal. And if that had gotten caught, I just had a concern that it would have, literally snapped off of the pins. So my solution was to switch the pins around there. As I'm working on the bottom part of the plant, dandelions tend to have a lot of leaves, so I wanted to make sure that it looked full and healthy. And I think I did that without having too many gaps in there. So now that green heart that I'm working on and copying and flipping around, as you can now easily see, that green heart is the base of my clovers that I'm using on the clover part of the pin. The idea I had at first was that there would just be one section of the ground that was covered in clovers. And I was thinking maybe that I would do some grass for the other sections. That's not how the pin ended up turning out. But part of that was because I just didn't want too many colors of green competing with each other. But you can see that I'm not covering the entire clover section that I started with clovers. That would have been too visually busy, too confusing, too many little cells. So what I'm doing, instead of having a whole bunch of individually drawn clover leaves, I'm having a couple clusters of clover leaves, and then I'm making sure that the edge has that kind of rounded form to imply that there is a large section of clover leaves. And then just little, the little filled in shapes are nice to just add a little bit of visual interest. But that's kind of a nice little trick there. There was no reason to do clover leaves covering that entire section. It would have been entirely too complicated looking, would have been difficult to produce, and I honestly don't think it would have looked very good. So instead of that, we are implying a bunch of clover leaves with those kind of repeated rounding shapes on the edge of that section. If you've ever had clover in your yard, you can recognize those little kind of off-white flowers that I've put in. That's, those are clover flowers. The real ones have a bunch of little petals. I've just kind of clumped them together into a generalized shape, but I think it works pretty well. I think it reads as clover. If you've ever seen clover, I think you'll recognize what this plant is. If you look now, at this point in the video, the clover that is overlapping part of the D20 is currently a 3-leaf clover. At a later point in the video, very quickly that changes to a 4-leaf clover. For this video, it takes hardly a blink of an eye to notice it, because when I'm doing these videos, I speed them up to do the talking over, because I know you're not going to watch a 4-hour video of this being designed. So I condense it down by speeding it up. But at some point, that clover turns into a 4-leaf clover, and because I wanted there to be a little bit of luck touching that D20. But now I'm on to working on the vine. So the reason I even introduced this vine, one, because, I wanted a third kind of weedy-like plant, but I also wanted there to be some visual interest on the left side of the pin. The right side's got the dandelions, and I think that adds a lot of visual interest. And here on the left, I was just going to have the bee. And before I even illustrated the bee, I was just thinking about it, and I was just like, I don't think that there's going to be enough going on this side, so let's add a vine. So that's why I did that. And now I'm actually starting in on the bee. The bee was very challenging for me. I have illustrated bees before, but I always have to look at a reference, because bees are not something that I draw frequently enough to have kind of a mentally locked in image of what they are like. So you can see it started off, it's the wings definitely too small, but the important parts are there, which are the head, the thorax, which is kind of like its upper body, where all of its limbs are attached, including its wings, and then the abdomen, which is the big bulbous part that's attached at the very end of the bee. I also did some research into bumblebee color patterns. So I found this really interesting. There are actually a lot more color patterns to bumblebees than I had any idea about. They can have orange stripes, they can have reddish stripes, some of them have white, some of them don't have white. They have yellow stripes, some of them have, just kind of one band on each segment of their body, some of them have multiple bands. So what I ended up doing, I just picked one that I thought looked cute. I found a photograph of a bumblebee that somebody had taken, and I was like, you know what? I like the color pattern on this particular bee, and that's what I copied when I was doing this. I didn't copy the actual I didn't copy the actual photo, but I used that as my template for what the color pattern should be on this particular bee. Anytime you're doing an illustration of an animal, whether it's something that you have experience with or not, I think it's always a good idea to look at some reference photos to get an understanding of the anatomy of that creature. With pins, we're obviously not trying to make them photorealistic. It's highly stylized, cartoony, one might even say. But you need to have an understanding of what it looks like in real life to know which parts to include and which parts which parts to exclude. It's really an exercise in editing the information so that it has a look that you enjoy while still conveying what exactly it is. We wouldn't want this to look like a wasp or a hornet or a honeybee. Well, we might want it to look like a honeybee, but in this particular case, we wanted a bumblebee. So it was important to understand what is a bumblebee and how is it different from other types of bees. But all bees, whether they're honeybees or bumblebees, they have 6 legs, 2 wings, 2 antennae, 2 eyes, a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So that's what the basics of what we have here. And the first time I drew this bee, I liked him. There's obviously some adjustments that'll happen later, but I'm pretty happy with where he looks even at this point in the video. He's maybe it's a she, I don't know. It is a chubby bee, and they look like they're ready to go out and do their thing. Now, something I learned later was that, bumblebees don't seem to live in like the hive-like structure that you would think about for honeybees. I didn't know much about them. I found that out kind of after the fact. So the fact that I ended up coloring the D20 like honey, I kind of took some artistic license there, because no one's ever going to be raising bumblebees for honey. Honeybees are specifically used because they produce such an excess of honey within their hive structure. That's not what bumblebees do. But it's still a cute aesthetic, and I still think it kind of gets the point across. So, that's the color I left it with. On the actual pins themselves, the orange color for the D20 is filled in with a transparent enamel. You can see through that enamel to the metal behind it. And I think that adds to kind of the stylized honey feel to it. It doesn't just look like orange. To me, it looks like honey. I think it's cool. I like it. When if I eventually have more of them produced than the first run, I might think about having those done just as a solid orange. But I really do enjoy how that transparent enamel looks. If you're looking at this video now, I've marked out my cutout spots. There's 2 of them on this pin. They're marked by that red X. The cutouts are important to mark. They make sure that my manufacturer knows, or manufacturer, production partner, whatever word we're using, it makes sure they know which white parts on the design are actually supposed to be filled in with white enamel and which parts are supposed to be holes cut into the pin itself. Without those, the bottom part of the bee abdomen, how would you know whether that's supposed to be filled in with white enamel or if that's supposed to be cut out? You kind of think of it's logical, it's intuitive. You can't take that chance when someone else is doing the physical production of something. You need to be explicit and make sure that it's marked. This is a cutout. This is white enamel. Otherwise, it can introduce confusion, and nobody wants to get a pin that's not what they were anticipating. This would look very strange if the bottom part of the bee's abdomen was actually a cutout. So as I continue to work on this design, you can see that I still have a section of brown dirt on it. I was considering at one point leaving that as brown dirt. I also considered putting that as blades of grass. The blades of grass idea quickly got taken off the table by me. I just thought that would be far too confusing. Visually, I thought it would be too much metal, too many little cells to be filled in. This pin already has a lot of little cells to be filled in. Especially with the clover leaves. On the few clovers that I did explicitly draw all of the leaves, and the vine has the little leaves, and it's just, this is a very detailed pin, and I knew that going into it. So if there was a way that I could make it a little less detailed, that's something I was interested in doing. So you can see that I decided to make that final section into clover as well. I just felt like leaving it brown didn't really serve well for the pin design for 2 reasons. One, it looked a little strange, because if the ground is good enough for the dandelion to grow, why isn't something else growing there? And 2, by eliminating the brown, I eliminated that color as a whole in the pin design. That's one less color that needs to be used. I feel like that's important because each time you introduce a new color, that's one more time that the pin needs to go through the baking process. So, if I can get away with removing a color completely, that can be a good thing. The pin design is almost done at this point. We're really just doing some last minute adjustments to the bee itself. I wanted it to be a little bigger, a little puffier, a little fluffier, a little more like I want to give him a hug. You probably should not hug bees. I don't think they like it. But I think this pin design came out really well. I think it's really cute. I think it's fun to remind people about bees. I like people to be thinking about bees because then they might think about the bees if they go to use a pesticide. They might think about it before they go and, kill off all the flowering things that are in their lawn. There's a lot we can do to help these guys out, all of them, because we need them to help us out. So, I hope that you enjoy this design. I hope that you think more about bees, do something to help them out. If you like watching me design these pins and seeing the process, I would encourage you to go ahead and like and subscribe this. Every time I put out a new pin, you'll get to see it here, and you'll get to hear some of my thoughts I had while working on it. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I hope you have a great one. See you in the next video. Buzz, 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 buzz.